Not going very well for the Golden Gopher men's basketball team. First game of the Big Ten men's tournament in Indianapolis, Indiana. 54, I guess the Gophers just cut it, at least on my score sheet, to a 54-41 deficit against Northwestern. We'll keep an eye on that game as we get closer to the end of it. But a lot of college basketball to get to with our next guest, Rick Bozich, who's covered the sport forever and ever, still based in Louisville, writing and still broadcasting for WDRB and WDRB.com in Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome back to the show. It's been a while. We appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I think it's a yearly question I ask you regarding Big Ten basketball and how viable you think the teams at the top of this conference might be when it comes to NCAA discussion. What do you think?
In terms of winning it all?
Yeah, or even say Final Four. Teams that you think legitimately, based on what you've seen this whole year, have a chance to make a run.
Michigan State, I think, has a chance to get to the Final Four. I don't think they can win it all, but it wouldn't surprise me if they got beat the first weekend because they're not a really great offensive team. They don't have a great shooter. They don't really rely on the three-point shot, and I could see them struggling because of that. Michigan, it's hard to project because they completely collapsed here at the end of the season. So I don't know how they're going to perform. It'll be interesting to see what they do in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
The team that I actually think is a viable dark horse team is Maryland. They've won, I think, 11 out of 13, and one of the losses was on that half-court shot against Michigan State. Yeah. They've got a talented athletic team, and they do have a couple of shooters, and they've got a really good freshman center by the name of Derek Queen who can pass the ball or score. And Kevin Willard is from the Pitino coaching tree, and they're one of my sleeper picks. I don't think they can win it all, but I think they could get to like maybe the Elite Eight.
Have you gotten used to having all these West Coast teams in? Are you still? I mean, at some point you have to accept it. I mean, because it's nothing you can do about it. But does it still feel funky and weird to you? I think the other day my guy Eric Musselman got killed. They got killed by UCLA, I think by 30. And he came back melting down about home court advantage. I mean, and I'm thinking, this is Big Ten. It's Big Ten country, UCLA and USC, but it does still feel a little bit uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, UCLA came in and played at Indiana on Valentine's Day, and they won. It was weird, and then they flew home, then they came back, and later in the year played at Purdue. They made at least 3 trips across the country. Indiana went out and played Oregon and Washington. Everybody, the regular Big Ten teams go out there once, and the West Coast teams come this way 3 times, and there's no way that can be equitable. And, it's a similar situation in the ACC. Last week, Louisville finished its home season playing California and Stanford as part of the ACC. I mean, it's the weirdest. And that's Michael Jordan and Lynn Bias and, Christian Leitner's league, and it's Cal and Stanford, and they looked, I don't know, I wouldn't say disinterested, but they didn't look very engaged. And it's just asking a lot of those teams in terms of the travel.
That's a good point. Well, who's that? Yeah, who's the UCLA coach? Didn't he do it? He melted down on
Nick
that very
Cronin.
subject.
Yeah, he went off on it when somebody said Iowa had a tough time going out west.
Right.
He said, teams that come here come to LA and they stay in the same hotel for 5 days, and we go there and, 3 times.
Yeah.
And he's right.
Yeah.
But, it'll be tomorrow, like Indiana plays in the Big Ten tournament at noon up in Indy, and they play Oregon. And I think it's a big advantage. First of all, they're in Indianapolis where they have, 1,000 fans for every one Oregon fan. And secondly, it's a noon game. That's 9 o'clock Oregon body clock time. And after the time change, it's really 8 o'clock. That should be another advantage for Indiana.
That's true.
And so, I think those teams are dealing with a lot.
Yeah.
And I just don't see the appeal of Rutgers against Oregon or the Virginia Tech against Stanford. It's stupid.
It is a little. It's a little jolting even now, even though we know it's sort of like the way it's working. Is this?
We all grew up with the point of conferences was geographic
had a place,
proximity where. Especially in football, I mean, you could plan a football trip for a weekend and go watch your team play on the road, and it ain't that way anymore.
No.
And it's gotten to where it is just because of football, and, there's a a greater segregation of the haves and the have-nots in terms of their financial resources and their access to the higher level television entries. And even today, I've gotten complaints from people like, how come I can't watch the Big Ten tournament? I said, well, it's on Peacock. I'm not paying for that. It's
Yes.
like, you might not be paying for it,
Yeah,
but you're either going to start paying for it
right.
or you won't be able to watch games because it ain't going back to the way it was before.
No, for sure. Is this a year you see there's like 15, 20 teams that can win it, or is it a year where it's top heavy? What just beyond just the Big Ten? What do you see?
I don't know. There's probably 8, if I had to guess. There's, maybe 15 that can get to the Final Four. I think that Duke is really good. SEC probably has 3 or 4 teams: Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, Alabama. They're all good. Houston's legit, and you could probably pick a few. I think St. John's with Rick Pitino is legit. Their offensive numbers aren't great, but their defensive numbers are terrific, and he's the best coach in college basketball. If anybody can figure out a way to do it, he can, and he's extremely motivated to show people that he can. So, and they won the Big East by 2 or 3 games. So that St. John's is a team to definitely keep your eye on.
Pitino and Pitino. I think they made history because each of them gets Coach of the Year in the same year in their respective conferences. We've talked about Richard before. We've talked about Rick before. You covered him heavily. You knew Richard obviously because he worked in the staff. But give me could you see this resurrection coming? Was this one where you go, no, that's not going to happen? Or deep down, did you say, well, if somebody gives him a chance where he has a chance to succeed, yeah, this is not all that surprising. What do you make of his ascension again to the top? They're selling out the Garden. They're the talk of the town in New York.
I'm not one bit surprised, and I'll tell you why. One is he won at Iona before he went to St. John's.
Yeah.
2 is he's highly motivated because of the way he left Louisville in disgrace, and he feels like he was wrongly pushed out of the job and that Louisville's never apologized to him. The NCAA never apologized to him, and he wants to get back on the national stage and show people that. And thirdly, it's NIL such a big factor now, and a big St. John's benefactor is a guy named Mike Rapole, who owned Vitamin Water, which he sold for billions to somebody, and then I think he owned another Body Armor or some other drink. He sold that. He's a super wealthy guy who loves St. John's basketball. He sits courtside. He's best friends with Pitino, and they've got money. And they took Seton Hall's best player away, Kadari Richmond. Most of their guys are out of the portal. So with Pitino's name, their portal, what they have available in the portal, he's going to be good for as long as he wants to be good. And he's going to be a guy, he's 72 going on 42, and he's going to coach 10 or 15 more years.
There's he hasn't lost the edge, has he? There's nothing to indicate that he's lost any of that.
He was on Jimmy Fallon last week.
Yes.
He's so motivated. The Louisville Sports Information Director retired a couple of years ago, and the St. John's Sports Information Director had some kind of a medical issue early in the year, so he talked the former Louisville SID who was here into moving to New York and helping him do all the media stuff they needed to do, and it was only supposed to be for 4 weeks. And he's still there and will be there to the end of the season because that's the way he is. When he wants something, he gets it.
Yeah. Is Richard going to stay, you think? Or is he going to be in demand at all?
His name's already been mentioned for Virginia, which I think is not a good job because you're following Tony Bennett, who won a national championship, and it's hard to win there. And his name is also in the mix at NC State, which is, you can argue about how good of a job that is. I think they're motivated to win, and they have won some in the past, but you're right in the shadow of Carolina and Duke, so I'm not sure I would do it. I think he wanted to get involved at Miami, but that went to Jay Lucas. So if I were him, I would go. It's going to be hard to win the Mountain West again and be the coach of the year. Yeah. But in terms of what he could get, I'm not sure.
Who's going to be the next Indiana coach?
I talked to Justin before we got on, said keep your eye on Chris Collins. He's my dark horse candidate.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
He's my dark horse candidate because He's only 50 years old.
Yeah.
I know that people poo-poo his record, but if you check the history of Northwestern, I think since 1950, he's the only coach to win more than 60% of his games in a season. He's done it 4 times. He's the only guy to take him to the NCAA tournament. He's done it 3 times, and every time he won a game. He's won his last 5 against Indiana. He's got the Coach K stamp of approval. And a lot of the big-name guys, they don't move anymore.
Yeah.
They didn't go to Kentucky last year. They didn't go to Louisville last year. And I could see Chris Collins saying, I've taken this Northwestern thing as far as I can. I could probably win at Indiana. And I've heard his name for Indiana and Villanova. Those are the 2 names I've heard Chris Collins.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a new one for me. That's tantalizing. By the way, his Wildcats, Chris Collins' Wildcats, leading the Gophers by 15 with about 4 to 5
and he's
minutes,
playing
4
without
minutes to
his
go.
best player.
Yeah.
Brooks Bernheiser got hurt like a month ago.
2 of their top 3 scorers, right? I think, are out. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He's a good coach.
He is a good coach, yeah.
I mean, Indiana fans, if they do hire, I mean, it's going to be him. Brad Brownell of Clemson is another name who he went to the Elite 8 last year. He beat Duke this year. He'll be in the tournament. He's from Evansville. There's a guy by the name of Ben McCollum, who's the coach at Drake, who won 30 games and won the Valley this year. Doug McDermott of Creighton is another one, but it's not going to be Scott Drew. It's not going to be, I don't think it'll be Mick Cronin. It's not going to be Brad Stevens. It's not going to be Chris Beard. I think
Stevens.
It'll be an off-the-radar guy because, as I said, in these days, you can win in a lot of different places with NIL. And there's a number of coaches that don't want the fishbowl experience of IU basketball.
Yeah, all those are very, very fair points. Rick Bozich joining us, longtime writer, also these days broadcasting for WDRB. And writes for their website, WDRB.com. And his most recent piece, which I highly recommend, I'm going to be retweeting it as soon as we wrap up our conversation with him, is Rick's ode to Junior Bridgeman, an individual he got to know well, who died. He had talked about maybe he's at an event, and that he felt like he was having a heart attack. They were unable to revive him. So he dies at the age of 71 years old. I mentioned earlier, look, he's not a household name, but I have been, and you got into this heavily in the column, the number of big-time basketball heavyweights who have been devastated by this news and have commented on it tells me that he should be a big name in an essential way. So to folks out there who just don't know who Junior Bridgeman is, and they've just seen the headline that he is getting, some stories are being done on him and that he had passed away, who is or who was Junior Bridgeman?
Junior Bridgeman is, when he passed now, and I hate to talk about him in past tense, one of the 5 wealthiest black Americans in the United States. He's a billionaire, worth like $1.4 billion, who never made more than $350,000 in the NBA, even though he played in it 12 years. When he was with the Milwaukee Bucks for most of that career, he became friends with Jim Fitzgerald, the owner, and said, what 99% of all basketball players don't do. I'm not going to do this forever. You're a successful businessman. I want you to help me transition into something else. He bought a Wendy's. I think it was with Paul Silas in Brooklyn. It didn't work out. Silas got out. Bridgeman dug in, bought some more. He ended up, buying a few Wendy's and a few Wendy's more. He got over like 200 Wendy's and then parlayed that. He bought a bunch of Chili's. He bought a bunch of, there's another restaurant, Blaze Pizza. He's got a group of barbecue places here in Louisville. Made enough money doing that and in his investments that he then transitioned. Now he's got Coca-Cola distributorships in Kansas City and Canada. And he's now a 10% owner of the Milwaukee Bucks. And he's became the roadmap, really. It's what made Shaq almost cry last night. I mean, the NBA had him in to talk to players about, listen, this guy is going to show you what's important. Your basketball life is a tiny part of your life, and you're going to have a lot of people leaning on you for their money, and they're going to take advantage of you. They're not going to really care about you, and this guy's going to show you the way that you can turn this into money that you can live on for the rest of your life. And some people listened to him and some didn't. And in the city of Louisville, his generosity is unmatched in terms of they built a big museum downtown for Muhammad Ali, the Muhammad Ali Center. He was a driving force behind that. There's a school downtown in a disadvantaged part of town that he was a driving force behind that. He's given millions to the University of Louisville, churches, other things. And seriously, I don't know anybody that doesn't like Junior Bridgeman. And it hit me really hard because, like you, he's from Lake County, Indiana, Northwest Indiana. He graduated in high school the same year I did at East Chicago, Washington, on one of the greatest high school teams of all time. And I've been a Junior Bridgeman fan since I was in high school and followed his career. And, as I wrote, when you meet your heroes, they tell you, be careful, you might be disappointed. And he's a hero that would never disappoint you.
Tell the audience about the meeting you had with him in Louisville at a Wendy's, how that came about and what you ended up observing him do once you got there.
He owned some Wendy's in Louisville. I called. This was pre-cell phone. I called, got his number, called and got his secretary and said, I need to talk to Junior for a story. I don't even remember what it was about. She took a message. She called me back. Said, sure, I'll be happy to meet with you. Meet me at Wendy's. I said, well, is there like a headquarters or a building? No, the Wendy's on Shelbyville Road by Oxford Mall. Come out there like noon, like tomorrow. So I went out there at noon. I went in the restaurant. I went to the counter. And I said, I'm here to talk to the owner, Junior Bridgeman, because, he's right there, and pointed over to the drive-through window, and Junior was passing out meals and, Cokes and fries and burgers and napkins and talking to the customers about what they liked and what could we have done better and watching the way things were flowing at lunchtime. And he got done, and I said, what are you doing? And he goes, I do this a couple days a week, because this is how you really know, what's working and what's not working in the business. And I want to see the people that work here that, what their challenges are and how I can make it better for them. And like he'd go to a different Wendy's the next time. And that's the way he really learned the way the business worked. And it was impressive. And he's just an unusual guy. He's no pretense about him. And you would never know he was worth millions or billions. Yep. And, I've heard, I couldn't get all the stories I had in there just about him. But as I mentioned in the story, John Lucas, the former NBA star who's had major substance abuse problems, called in to a radio show unprompted here today and said, I just want to tell you my Junior Bridgeman story. Then I was with the Bucks and I had to go to rehab, and I came back to the team. They assigned me to live with Junior on the road, room with him on the road, because they were sure he'd help straighten me out, and he did. And so, you talk about making an impact with your life. Junior Bridgeman did.
Remarkable. Yeah, 100%. June 16, 1975, the L.A. Lakers acquire a center named Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and a big man named Walt Wesley from the Milwaukee Bucks in exchange for Elmore Smith, Brian Winters, Dave Myers, and Junior Bridgeman.
Junior Bridgeman.
What kind of basketball player was Junior Bridgeman?
He started a good bit for the Bucks. He was sort of probably a small forward because he wasn't a great outside shooter, but he was a very versatile defender who could defend multiple positions. He was a good rebounder, and he ended up being a really epic sixth man. He played on those Bucks teams with Myers, Marcus Johnson, Quinn Buckner, Kent Benson, that were always pretty good, but not good enough to win the Eastern Conference back then. But he played 12 years in the league, and that's hard to do, and averaged, I think, 13.7 a game. So he had a really good career, and, they love him in Milwaukee, and they're hurting in Milwaukee, and they're hurting in Louisville right now.
Yeah, there were some outstanding sound bites from Doc Rivers. They lost a tough game last night. I don't know if these comments came before the game or after the game, where he talked about getting to know him and also kind of lamenting that it was one of those deals where we're constantly talking about we got to get together, and then you run out of time, and that's exactly one of the things he was talking about. But how helpful it was, with Rivers returning to Milwaukee, he uses an example of, a second chance to be around people that he never knew he'd have a chance to again, and Bridgeman was in that classification.
We always talk about the Antoine Walkers and the Latrell Sprewells or guys who made a bunch of money and then blow it all. And this is the diametrical opposite guy. And those guys never get enough publicity or enough respect or enough admiration. And he he not only did that, he tried to help other people.
Exactly.
And that's what made him stand out.
That's the key right there, right? Because you say, yeah, okay, he's a billionaire, but it was all of the, I mean, we're going to see this the next few weeks, Ricky, that every person who came in contact with him may have a story to tell that hasn't always been told publicly or hasn't been told publicly in a long time. You used an example of John Lucas. There's going to be you're getting some of those. There's going to be, you got emails. There's going to be a bunch more of those, and that's why he's worth the time. He's worth every minute to Ode today, no matter what market you happen to be in. So he's appearing, it was yesterday, at a fundraising event for the Boy Scouts, right, in downtown Louisville. What do we know from there?
I got a text, I don't know, like 1:30 in the afternoon, and said that something happened with Junior Bridgeman at the Galt House, which is a historic hotel on the Ohio River in downtown Louisville, and it was I don't know if there was 500 people there or 700 people or whatever, but he was the featured speaker, and he was being interviewed actually by another TV personality here in town. And instead of giving a speech, he was just being interviewed. And at some point during the interview, while he was mic'd up, he just said, "I think I'm having a heart attack," and fell over.
Man.
And they cleared the room, and there were a couple of doctors that were in the crowd that ran up and tried to assist him. And EMS was called, and there's a hospital only like 7 blocks away, and they got him there as fast as they could. But it was too late, and just a tragic scene that a lot of people in Louisville saw, and it was just yesterday was a really jarring day for people in Louisville. It really was.
I'm sure.
His hands are around so many different things in this community. He's got 3 children who they run parts of the business for him, and I'm sure they'll take over now. And like I said, he grew up in East Chicago, but he played here at Louisville. And then after his NBA career was over, I think because his wife was from Louisville, he came back and stayed here. That he made a difference.
Remind me, you had this in the column as well, going back to East Chicago days, about I think his wanting to be a Boy Scout and why he was unable to do so.
He grew up in Indiana Harbor. His dad worked a couple of jobs, and I read it in a story by Baxter Holmes at ESPN.com that his mom knew that he wanted to be a Boy Scout, but he never could join because they couldn't afford the $1.50. I don't know if it was $1.50 a week fee or $1.50 something, but it was $1.50 fee that the family couldn't afford.
Look, we all live in, and we're all forced to a certain degree, to live online, right? And we, I think, hate ourselves as we do it, but we still do it to a certain extent. And what are the stories that drive all this stuff? Nothing like this. That's what's fascinating to me. There's going to be a bunch of people who are going, I didn't know anything about this guy, right? And it's not like no one's ever written about him. I'm sure you've written about him many times, but he's not in that circle. He doesn't represent the way things are, that circulate around today. There's nothing gossipy about it. There's nothing controversial about it. It's just a guy who, and it is a reminder that, there are other people out there. They may have not done things at his level in terms of business, but who help in various ways. But that's not part of the currency, right? Those stories, there ain't going to be a lot of conversation and debate about that on ESPN, First Take.
No, I didn't watch them. I don't ever watch them, so I don't know if they talked about them today or not. If they didn't, shame on them. I will watch PTI and see if they mentioned them.
I'm sure
I would think they would because Wilbon probably knew him. But, we don't gravitate towards those kinds of stories. Although I will say in the last 4 months, I don't remember if it was Fortune or Forbes. I think it was Fortune did a big story on this worth reading. So you might want to look over that. But in terms of the sports media, no, he didn't do crazy things. And, I think the hope was at some point that I think he wanted to own an NBA team at some point. Now, he did get 10% of the bucks in the last year, but I think the NBA would have definitely been in favor of that, of having him as one of its owners. And I'll be shocked if Adam Silver doesn't come in for the funeral.
Yeah, me too, 100%. In fact, it now occurs to me, I'm looking here, scrolling quickly. Yeah, John Krasinski covers the Wolves here for The Athletic, a longtime contributor to this show, forever, once a week. And he was, when the story broke, one of the tweets he sent out was Bridgeman had shown interest in buying the Timberwolves back in the day. Rest in peace to a true success story. I don't know. I don't remember how deep that went. But it kind of validates your point that it seemed like that was part, perhaps potentially, of his vision. It's somewhere down the road that he would try to get involved at various levels, and he was a minority owner of the Bucks ultimately, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the last 6 months, I think Jimmy Haslam sold him 10% of the team. And I have a friend who's friends with Junior who went to 4 or 5 Bucks games with him this year and said you'd go into the Fiserv or whatever it's called arena, and they treated him like royalty. In Milwaukee, he was loved.
71 years old, way too young. Great to catch up. Sorry it's in part under these circumstances, but we'll continue to chat, especially as we get closer into the tournament. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Ricky.
Thank you, Ben. Bye.
Rick Bozich, WDRB.com. I'm going to retweet a link to the column he wrote earlier today. We only barely scratched the surface of much of what he got into, and an outstanding tribute to this marvelous individual who everybody should, I think, get to know a little bit better. And sadly, it would be after the fact, but he is definitely worth the time, no matter what world in which we live right now. Well, it's in the books. The Golden Gopher men eliminated in the first round of the Big Ten tournament. Northwestern 72 and the Golden Gophers 64. Last 2 minutes, you could tell, was a great deal of frustration for Collins because his team seemed to be doing some things to help Minnesota have a feeling they might be able to climb back in it. But in the end, it ended up being too little, too late. Looking at the box score, and it does not tell a very encouraging story for the Gophers. They shot 37.7% from the floor compared to Northwestern, who that was almost at 50. Northwestern was 48.2. We were 7 for 22 from 3. Did get to the free throw line a decent amount, 17 for 21. As it is, that's part of the reason Minnesota could hang around late. Northwestern was 12 for 22 from the free throw line. I was listening to the broadcast late via Peacock during that break, too, and they were a little bit behind, so I got a little taste of some of the late comments towards the end of the show. And, you look at Dawson Garcia's score total, 22 points, that's certainly representative, right? I mean, that's nothing wrong with that. But what they were talking about on the broadcast is needed more shots. He only took 13 shots.
Yeah.
And
there was a stretch where I feel like he took none.
Yeah, exactly.
In the second half.
And I think we know how this team is built, right? They generally have to have something pretty substantial from him, and unfortunately they were unable to get it. Patterson, 3 Gopher starters combined for 3 for 14 from the floor. That's not helpful either. So we're done. That I think Northwestern goes on to play Wisconsin. I was fascinated by Bozich thinking that Chris Collins, the Northwestern coach, could be a dark horse choice for IU.
Yeah, I had the same reaction.
I had not heard that before. Had you?
No.
And he's pretty plugged in. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's I think part of what the point he was making, and there's a lot of schools that fall into this classification that they've historically been big, and their fans always think they can get, when there's a coaching vacancy, they can get anybody they want because it's Indiana. And the dirty little secret is that's not true at many schools as it used to be. And I think Indiana's at that point now where they're not going to get whoever they want. In fact, the guy they want was probably at Michigan,
Dusty
the former
May.
ball boy, who I think now has signed an extension to stay at Michigan. But there's no automatic part to this thing. Again, I mean, I guess where it would get interesting would be if Indiana said, "Okay, we're going to reinvent the wheel here. We're going to go A-Raj on the bit. We're going to basically send Rick Pitino a blank check and say, you fill it in. Whatever it takes, we're going to bring you." But although when I've asked Bozich about that in the past, he said, I don't think he's going to be fine at St. John's.
Why mess with Happy?
He has no reason to think that he can't have a national program there. Now, he's got all them, he mentioned the billionaire who's their big NIL guy. So I don't know. But Collins would be an interesting name because it might actually be more realistic, and in some ways it might actually make some sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense, given that you and I just started thinking about this the last 20 or 30 minutes.
Yes.
Because he has done a great job at Northwestern.
He has. It's undeniable.
And he's weathered some storms there, and that, as we all know, is a really hard place to win.
Extremely.
And he obviously knows what he's doing. He's a good coach with good pedigree, and he's been there. He was hired the same year as Richard Pitino was hired here.
Think about it.
2013. So he's been there a really long time. And sometimes those things do just run their course. And he might be thinking, you know what? I've done it. My kids have grown up here.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm a Chicago kid. This was awesome. But wouldn't it be nice to coach at one of the halves where resources aren't going to be an issue? And Mark Cuban can write me some checks. And, John Cougar Mellencamp and Meg Ryan can help me write some checks, and I can get some more players.
Okay, let's get to what everybody's going to be thinking about and talking about is the future of Ben Johnson now that he's out. Somebody had, I think it was Goodman, somebody had a national report today. See that
Jeff Borzello.
Oh, it's Borzello. I'm sorry. Yep. Said that he's coming back next year. His reporting indicates he's going to get it likely to come back for another year.
Yep.
Is this the kind of thing, you know Coyle pretty well. He doesn't talk a lot, but you do know him. So whatever he's going to do, is it going to be a quick proclamation, you think, where if he's going to make a move, that will be announced quickly? And if it's that, no. We're coming back with him. We're going to have, we had Chip Scoggins on the other day about how aggressive, apparently, the U is going to be, and that Coyle is saying we're going to end up, he didn't say this, but this is what Scoggins sort of surmised after talking to a lot of people behind the scenes, that the intent here is to improve the NIL to such a degree that they are in the top 5 in the Big Ten in NIL. So if that's even realistic, is Coyle going to do the old Ben Johnson deserves a shot at that because it's been so crazy here? We don't love the position we're in. No, they shouldn't be losing to a Northwestern team that was below them in the seeds and had 2 of their top 3 players out hurt. But in fairness, we're going to give them another shot. Regardless, do you think we're going to know all of this quickly, or is Coyle not work that way in declarative sentences?
Well, I think he does work pretty declaratively.
When he's ready to do it, you're right.
But even if he's bringing him back, I think that needs to be declarative too.
I agree totally.
I think that
That's
needs
my point.
Be,
yes.
So I think it needs to be tomorrow, one way or the other, or at least relatively quickly before. Because
before the vultures start circling.
Well, and he's about to be, if he's not already, embedded in some conference room as part of the NCAA basketball selection committee and then on the road for a month. So I would be surprised if we didn't have some type of declaration one way or the other. And I think either way, and I have no idea what he's thinking. I do know, like you said, the revenue sharing piece, because that is different than NIL. There's the revenue sharing.
True. Yes.
And then there's the NIL, which is going to be what it's going to be, and that's improving.
So it's the revenue sharing that he's going to...
The $21 million that every big school now has the ability to pay because of this house settlement. Men's basketball here is getting, I think, a better chunk than even they originally thought they were going to get. And because there is some urgency there to improve the financial situation. But my point the last couple of months has been, whatever happens, there does need to be that declaration.
I agree totally.
If Ben's the coach, and Rick was even asking me, do you think he survives it? I have no idea. I do wonder how much guilt the administration feels that Ben built a team that, if they came back, was probably going to be better than the one that they just put out there. And they lost a couple of guys late because of money. But how much guilt do they feel?
That's it.
I don't know. But when you have the rev share thing, you have to come out and say either Ben's the guy or we're hiring a new coach, and this is what we're doing with men's basketball because we need to get men's basketball going. These are the steps that we have to take. That's what I feel like has to happen either way.
If for me, if there's any lesson that needs to be learned from the Villa 7 experience with Norwood Teague, it's this. Part of how you decide to go forward, in my view, is that you know who you can and can't get. And frankly, if you can't get someone that you're excited about or you don't think practically you can get them either financially or for other reasons, then I think there's less reason to do it just to do it. If you're going to do it, every AD knows this. You have to have a pretty good idea of who you think you can get. And if you go back to the Villa 7 in Norwood, that was his big miscalculation, right? When he fired Tubby, he thought he was going to get anybody he wanted. He thought his connections were such that even though it was the University of Minnesota, no, this is different. We're different. I'm connected in a way that no AD has been connected before, and he was connected in a lot of significant ways.
He was.
But he miscalculated, right? Because he did not intend to hire. When he fired Tubby, it wasn't like in his wallet he said, I got Richard Pitino at the top of my list, right?
Correct.
No chance.
Right.
In fact, he had to end up, basically as the story goes, right? Didn't he call Billy Donovan?
Yes.
Said, hey, help me out here.
What do you think?
And Donovan is the guy who was kind of mentioned Richard, and that's how that train left the track or left the station. So to me, that's part of what you have to do. You have to be, you may even in your mind think we need to move on, but you have to have someone in mind that through back channel feelers or whatever, or a couple people that you say, no, I've got 3 names. I like them all a lot. And I think we can get one of the 3. I'm almost positive we can, either financially or either way. That has to enter into it. I think if you're going to do it, if you're going to make the move and leave Ben Johnson behind.
Well, and every coach that you're going to call is going to ask about what we just talked about.
Yes.
What's the financial investment? Because even just being at the Final Four last year, talking to, I don't know, a dozen coaches on the radio and off the radio, the ones that had good NIL and were feeling good about it were in a great mood. The ones that did not were depressed and wondered why they ever got into coaching.
Yeah.
Because that is, whether people want to hear it or not, that's a big part of it now. And so I'm curious to see, because if he just brings Ben back and there's really not a, hey, we're bringing Ben back, like he needs to do it, in my opinion, emphatically and saying,
declaratively, yes.
I want to see Ben with a fuller deck.
Yes.
I feel like I've seen enough. We hired him 4 years ago for a reason. Obviously, it hasn't gone the way we want.
You have to sell it.
Exactly.
You really do. You're 100% right. I agree. If you're going to do it, and, I worry because I just think we're in such a state right now. It's just not on the radar screen anywhere. And I don't know how attendance fits in, because is it the last 2 years they've had attendance about as bad as it's been in about, I think, 30 years. So again, I know attendance isn't everything, but it's
an element.
It's an element. It's got to be an element of the story. But then you're back to, like I said, if Indiana is now thinking, well, again, we don't know this, but Bozich is pretty connected. Thinking about folks like Chris Collins, you go, it's the days of, you're going to get whoever you want.
There's not a slam dunk.
There's not as many slam dunks. And then to me, you're back to, at a program like this, you're back to me, the ongoing debate. Do you go? We have identified through our back channels and through our knowledge and talking to the right people and reading the right things. I need a break, don't I?
Yes.
I'm a little behind.
That's all right.
That you need to either go with a young guy that we just needs a chance. And this guy has got the charisma. I mean, we talked about this, Johnny and I did. I don't know if it was a day you were there or not. I mean, I think PJ is a good analogy. PJ is a personality. And look, I might not like all aspects of it. I might roll my eyes at some of it, but it's undeniable that there is a presence there, right? That you can't deny it. And that, I think, is what you need in basketball, too. Or do you say, okay, I got a couple retreads that I think are hungry enough now, and they're a little bigger names. They're maybe considered past their prime a little bit, and they've had some problems elsewhere, but we really like them, and they are a little bit larger than life. They do have maybe bigger personalities. To me, that's what it comes down to. Let's stay on schedule. We can continue this conversation the other side of a break after we went long with Mr. Bozich. Don't forget, Kessler will join us in studio at about 5:30. Do you think it's going to last long enough that we might want an A-Rod sounder? Like A-Rod watch. I don't know. I'm just asking. I mean, I keep thinking it's going to happen like any minute. That despite all the speculation, we're going to get somebody breaking a story that he is signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah.
And this little game that we've played the last few days will be over. I'll say again, as recently as earlier this afternoon, Kevin Seifert continues to repeat what he told us yesterday. He thinks it's not likely Rodgers is here, but he continues. His reporting indicates that the Vikings are talking about it. And you quoted from, is it Diane Rossini?
Yes.
Another, a national reporter, basically doubling down on that, saying pretty much the same thing, maybe even in even more certain terms, that those discussions are ongoing. We had a report from one of the tabloids with some photo. Paparazzi found Aaron Rodgers by himself in Malibu, walking the beach, bare feet, forlorn look on his face. This was last night.
It's an idyllic scene.
It's an unbelievable scene is what it is. I wonder if he ran into, I think KG's house is still in Malibu, isn't it? Is he still on the water?
I think he is.
I think Jimmy Jam moved.
Yep,
but
they're up in the hills,
KG,
maybe.
Yeah, KG I think is still there. I wonder if he's nearby, if he's a neighbor.
I'm sure he is.
In any case, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it hasn't. And I think the longer it takes, the more tantalizing it becomes. I really do, because I'm going, what are the Vikings waiting for? Because if the Vikings...
They could shut it down.
They could shut it down immediately and say, we just added, you name the backup quarterback. There's several of them still available.
That's the other part of it.
Including, who's the guy who was with Cleveland most recently? And Jameis Winston.
Yep.
Right? And I don't even know if that's who they're interested in. I have no idea.
But there's like a half dozen guys they could have already signed and said, this is our backup quarterback.
Yeah, so they're obviously entertaining something. Give us a trigger warning next time you mention Teague and Villa 7 again, please. When's the last time you've been in touch with Norwood, with Woody? Has it been a while?
With Norwood?
Yeah.
Man. When did he get fired? 2015, 2016?
Is it that long? Yeah, that sounds right.
I don't know.
Do we know what he's even up to?
Yes, he lives in Charlotte.
Okay.
He had kind of like a Chamber of Commerce marketing job type deal.
Okay, gotcha.
I think he's still in Charlotte.
Right.
I've been in touch with a couple of his henchmen
minions? Okay.
over the years, but not Norwood directly, I don't think.
Please, U of M hire Sam Mitchell. That's name's come up before. I know Sam wants to get back into it at any level. I think that part's true. I have no idea, though, whether that would fit whatever, because I don't think there's any natural connection between Sam and
no
the AD, right?
I don't think so.
Who's to say? IU basketball equals Nebraska football. It's a good analogy. You're right. Same thing. Where
exactly
it's like,
right.
You kidding me? Look at the guys we got coming in. Are you kidding? We can't be stopped. We're Indiana. We're Nebraska. And yet, these two programs, it's not like it's been awful, but it's not been anywhere near what it was supposed to be.
Matt Painter had a pretty good rant about it the other day when he was asked about it. And I liked what he said about, obviously he's going to say support your coach, whoever it is.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing. But he had a good bit, I thought, about the recruiting angle, where he said when Indiana gets guys, and I actually give him credit for talking about it because I don't think he really wanted to, but then he got going and he was asked about it. And he's kind of like in the Izzo territory now of elder statesman.
Yes,
he's been there forever. Mm-hmm. And he said, which was great because this same thing happens in Nebraska. He goes, and everything's so high and so low. These guys sign in the summer, and I'm hearing they're going to be Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. He goes, and they're not going to be that. They're good college players. They're going to be good. They're fine. But when they're not Michael Jordan, then everybody's mad and going, why aren't these guys better? Well, they're exactly who they thought, which I thought was interesting.
Bozich told me about that same interview.
It was great.
Exactly right. It was perfectly laid out. And that is part of the issue. There's no question about
There's
that.
a lot. I mean, I think about, we always joke on the Parent and Spare podcast that one thing, mark it down this time of year, when the much too early top 25 rankings come out, no matter what, Nebraska is going to be in the top 25.
Yes, very true.
And they always are.
Yeah, they always are.
And I happen to, by the way, really like their new head coach, Matt Rule. Like that to me is almost like a Chris Collins hire, like a guy who knows what he's doing, knows, went to the pros, it didn't work. But he knows how to run a college program. He's got a big-time coaching background. Like, I think he is going to get Nebraska back to respectability. Now, is it ever going to be Nebraska of the 90s? No. Is Indiana ever going to be Indiana of the 70s, 80s, and 90s with Knight? Probably not, right?
No.
That's the other thing people have to kind of stop chasing.
No question.
Because it's just, especially now with these super leagues.
There's no question.
I just read a story today. The SEC, if you want to talk about money, the SEC, Southeastern Conference, not exactly known for basketball excellence, is going to have 13 teams in the NCAA tournament. The SEC.
13.
They're going to have 2 number 1 seeds, Alabama and Auburn. Not exactly known for basketball excellence.
No, that's a different world.
But they hired some solid coaches. They invested, obviously, big time financially. They're getting dudes. No one's hit the portal harder than the SEC. They've got upperclassmen teams. But that shows you how it's never going to be the 70s, 80s, 90s again when the SEC is putting 13 teams into the Big Ten tournament. It's wild. And schools you would never think of for hoops.
100% true. A couple people want to know whether Tony Dungy would consider the Gopher men's basketball job.
Was he a hooper? I bet
he was a hooper.
I bet he played some good hoops.
Yeah, he was a hoop. Yeah, he's an all-around athlete. Yeah, athlete. We said that back in the day.
I do love this because no matter what happens, we're going to get the same 7 names. I assume Brian Dutcher's already been called. Like it is very fun.
What do we have for top 5?
We have Wolves, we have Wild, and we have the Minnesota Gopher season probably coming to an end today.
PayPal lets you pay all your pals, like your graduation gifters.
Who's paying for the mattress topper?
You mean the beanbag chair?
Aren't we getting a mini fridge?
Can we create a pool on PayPal? It lets us collect the money before we buy.
Ooh, yes, that's smart.
Glad we can agree on something.
Easily pool, split, and send money with PayPal. Get started in the PayPal app. A PayPal account is required to send and receive money. A balance account is required to create a pool.
Optimize your nutrition with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences, like Calorie Smart and Protein Plus. Factor's keto meals can help you lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks. Get started at factormeals.com/factor50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Weight loss with Factor Keto based on a randomized controlled clinical trial. Results will vary depending on diet and exercise.